The rain had been falling for 2 hours by the time Thomas Hallett pulled into the pharmacy parking lot on Clement Street. It was a Tuesday in November, close to 11 at night. The lot was nearly empty, lit by a single overhead lamp that threw orange light across standing puddles and the wet hoods of parked cars. He needed fever medicine for his daughter. That was all he had come for. He saw the boy sitting on the curb outside the pharmacy entrance. 16, maybe. A thin dark jacket, wrong for the weather, soaked completely through to the shape of his shoulders, knees drawn up. A duffel bag on the concrete beside him, dry on one side from where he had been leaning against the brick wall. He was staring at the phone in his hand with the particular stillness of someone who has sat in rain long enough that the cold has stopped being a new thing. Thomas went inside. He bought the medicine. He came back out. The boy was still there. Thomas stood for a moment on the wet sidewalk, the pharmacy light at his back. He looked at the boy. He looked at the rain coming down steadily across the parking lot lamps. The kind of rain that doesn't feel dramatic, but accumulates quietly. And he unzipped his canvas work jacket, flannel-lined, 6 years old, his name embroidered in small letters on the left chest, and walked over. If you already feel it, that tightening in your chest, hit the like button and subscribe to Hidden Ledger. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this story is just getting started. And the part they don't see coming? Keep watching. He crouched down to the boy's level, the way he had once crouched beside patients in hospital hallways when the room was too loud and someone needed to feel like the world had slowed down for a moment. "Is there somewhere you need to be?" Thomas said. The boy looked up. His eyes moved across Thomas carefully, the way eyes move when they have had to learn to read adults quickly. "I'm fine," he said. "The coat is yours for tonight," Thomas said. "My truck is the blue one by the exit. If you need somewhere warm, I'll be there for 5 minutes." He stood, walked to the truck, and left the door open. After 3 minutes, the boy got up. He picked up the duffel bag, walked over, and got in without saying anything else. Thomas drove him 12 blocks to an all-night diner on Mercer Street. He bought him a hot chocolate and a sandwich and sat across from him in a red vinyl booth and did not ask questions that required answering. The boy ate. Thomas drank a coffee and said very little, and the boy said almost nothing except, eventually, that his name was Declan. When Declan finished eating, Thomas left cash on the table for a cab and walked back out into the rain. He drove home in his shirt sleeves. His daughter Lily was asleep, still running a temperature of 101. He gave her the fever medicine, poured her a glass of water, and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark until her breathing went long and even. Then he went to the kitchen, rinsed a glass, and stood at the counter for a while, not thinking about much in particular. He did not think about the boy again that night. He thought about him the next morning, when someone knocked on his front door. To understand what happened when Thomas opened that door, you need to know what kind of man he was, and what he carried that the street he lived on couldn't see. Thomas Hallett was 44 years old. He lived in a 2-bedroom house on Garfield Avenue, a working neighborhood in the south end of the city, where the houses were modest and the streets were quiet and everyone knew the name of the grocery store manager because they had been shopping at the same place for 20 years. His truck was the oldest vehicle usually visible from his front window. The porch needed painting. Inside, the house was clean and spare. Shelves of books along one wall, a framed photograph of his daughter on the mantel, and the particular orderliness of a home where one adult does everything. What the street didn't know was this. Thomas had trained at Stanford Medical. He had published 14 peer-reviewed papers before he was 38. He had developed, over the course of 4 years of research and clinical work, a cardiac monitoring protocol, a specific, documented method for detecting early-stage arrhythmia in patients recovering from major surgery, that was now standard practice in the post-operative units of 61 hospitals across 7 states. His name was on the patent. Patent number 9,814,422. Filed 11 years ago with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The protocol had been licensed by Ashby Medical Systems 9 years earlier, when it was still relatively new and the terms had been fair and straightforward. Ashby Medical ran the protocol in every cardiac recovery unit in their network. It was embedded in their standard of care, in their nursing protocols, in their documentation systems. It generated, by Thomas's attorney's last estimate, approximately $11 million annually in reduced complication rates, shortened hospital stays, and secondary service revenue. Thomas received a royalty. It was deposited into an account he rarely touched. His wife Mara had died when Lily was 3. A January night, black ice on a bridge, a car accident of the kind that happens and afterward, nobody can explain why the world is arranged so that such things are possible. Thomas had been 2 floors away in the hospital when they brought her in. He had not operated on her. Protocol and his colleagues had ensured that, but he had been present for what happened afterward, and there were rooms inside that night he had never opened for anyone else. He left clinical medicine 14 months later. He didn't explain it publicly. He passed his hospital privileges to his department chair, enrolled Lily in the school 4 blocks from Garfield Avenue, and accepted a position with a community health organization that needed a physician willing to work out of a converted storefront on Clement Street for a fraction of his former salary. He had been doing that work for 8 years. He drove the old truck. He wore the work shirts with his name on them. He was at the clinic by 7 most mornings and home by dinner, and he had never told Lily what his name was on, because it had never seemed like the right time and because the value of the thing was not in having people know about it. That was the man who opened the door on a Wednesday morning in November. The man on the porch was tall and clean-shaven and wearing a coat that had not come off a rack. He had a stillness about him that came from money. The ease of someone who has not hurried in years and has forgotten what it felt like. There was a car at the curb behind him, black and very clean, with a driver waiting in the front seat. He was holding Thomas's canvas jacket in both hands. "I believe this is yours," he said. "My name is Conrad Ashby. I understand you helped my son last night." Thomas took the coat. "How is he?" he said. "He's home. He's fine." Conrad paused. His eyes moved across the front of the house, with the brief, nearly involuntary appraisal of a man who appraises things as a reflex. "I wanted to thank you in person, and to make sure you were properly compensated for the trouble." He reached into his coat and produced a white envelope. Thomas looked at it. He did not take it. "That isn't necessary," he said. Conrad's expression shifted, not irritation, but the particular recalibration of someone whose gestures are rarely declined. He held the envelope a moment longer. "Please. A night like that, the coat, the meal, that's a real cost. I want to make it right." Thomas looked at him steadily. "Your son was cold," he said. "I had a coat." Conrad extended the envelope again. "There's $1,000 in there. I'd feel better if you'd take it." Thomas looked at the envelope. He looked at Conrad. He said nothing. Conrad waited. He was trying to understand what Thomas wanted, because in Conrad Ashby's experience, everyone wanted something specific, and the question was only ever about finding the right form. "If it's not about the money," Conrad said, more carefully now, "tell me what I can do." "There's nothing you need to do," Thomas said. Conrad glanced past him into the front room. The walls of medical textbooks were visible from the porch. He registered them without comment, the way you register something that doesn't quite fit the picture you've assembled. "May I come in for a moment?" he said. Thomas stepped aside. Conrad stood in the front room with the attentiveness of a man who reads environments, the way other men read financial statements. He took in the shelves, the photograph on the mantel, the absence of anything that signaled surplus. He took in the embroidered name on Thomas's work shirt. He took in the worn state of the couch and the clean state of everything else. He was building a picture. Thomas watched him build it. "You live here alone?" Conrad said. "My daughter and I," Thomas said. "And you work at, is that a clinic?" The shirt. "Yes." "Community medicine?" The phrase came out with a certain texture, not contemptuous, but the kind of phrase you use for a thing you respect abstractly, without understanding concretely. "Yes," Thomas said. Conrad nodded slowly. He set the envelope on the coffee table. "You're a good man," he said. "I mean that. My son was in a difficult state last night, and someone did right by him, and I don't take that lightly." Thomas said nothing. "I could see from the looks of things that you gave what you had," Conrad continued. He gestured slightly at the room around them, the casual, encompassing gesture of a man who doesn't realize he's doing it. "It matters to me to make sure that's not a loss you feel." Thomas looked at him. The phrase sat in the air between them. Conrad tried once more. "The money is a gesture, nothing more. $1,000 doesn't account for it. But I understand," Thomas said. He understood more than he said. He understood that Conrad Ashby had come to his house with a check and an explanation already assembled. A story in which Thomas was a decent, struggling man who had performed a kindness beyond his means and deserved to be made whole. He had walked through the door with that story fully formed, and everything in the room had confirmed it. And nothing, not the medical texts, not the stillness in Thomas's manner, not the clarity of his refusal, had given him reason to look again. The envelopes sat on the coffee table between them. Conrad looked at the shelves one more time. "Are those medical texts?" he said. "Yes," Thomas said. Conrad's head tilted slightly. "Were you a doctor?" "I was," Thomas said. Something moved across Conrad's face. A rearranging. "You left medicine?" "I have a daughter," Thomas said simply. Conrad was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. Genuinely, Thomas thought. "I understand that," he said. And then he said the thing. He didn't mean it as contempt. He would have been surprised, and probably hurt to hear it called that. But he looked around the room one final time. The same room he had read 3 times now, always arriving at the same conclusion, and said, in the careful tone of someone being generous, "If you ever need a connection back into the field, there are programs, retraining resources. My foundation funds a few. For people navigating circumstances like yours." Circumstances like yours. Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "I appreciate that," he said. Conrad picked up the envelope from the coffee table, held it, then set it back down. "Please," he said. "For the coat, at least." He left. Thomas stood in the front room for a while after the black car pulled away. He looked at the envelope on the coffee table. He looked at the shelves of books that Conrad Ashby had examined carefully and drawn his conclusion from. He thought about $11 million a year, moving through 61 hospitals, and about the royalty deposit he hadn't checked in 4 months, and about an attorney's letter that had been sitting on his desk for 6 weeks, a letter he hadn't yet decided how to answer. He left the envelope where it was, and went to make breakfast. Lily came home from school at 3:15 and found him at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee. "Someone came this morning," she said. It wasn't a question. "Someone's father," he said. She poured herself a glass of juice and sat across from him and studied his face. She was 11 years old, and she had her mother's directness. "Did something happen?" "Not yet," Thomas said. She took her juice to the counter without pushing further. She had learned, over years of living with him, that not yet meant he was still deciding, and that when he was deciding, the kindest thing was to leave him the room. 3 days later, Declan Ashby rang the doorbell himself. He had a proper winter coat this time. Thomas's canvas jacket was folded over his arm, held with both hands, the way you carry something you know belongs to someone else. "Your father already brought it back," Thomas said. "I know," Declan said, "but I wanted to." He was different at the door than he had been in the diner. Less compressed, more present. Thomas noticed the circles under his eyes and the way he stood, not with the defensive curl of that first night, but with the careful uprightness of someone who has decided to be somewhere. Thomas stepped aside. Declan sat on the couch. Lily looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, assessed the situation with the swiftness of a person who had grown up reading A Quiet House, and went back to her work. Declan looked at the shelves of books the way people look at things in unfamiliar rooms, not reading them, just registering. He told Thomas about the fight with his father. Not the details, those stayed inside him, but the shape of it. The way conversations in the house ran on schedule and then ended. The way his father moved through rooms efficiently, present and absent at the same time. The way Declan had left with a duffel bag at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday because he could not think of what else to do. Thomas listened. He did not offer interpretations or solutions. He asked, once, whether Declan had eaten before he came. He had. They sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that Thomas had learned to hold with people who needed a room that didn't require anything of them. Then Declan said, "What kind of doctor were you?" "Emergency medicine, then critical care," Thomas said. "I specialized in cardiac." Declan nodded. "My dad has a company that does something with heart monitoring," he said, with the vague familiarity of someone who has heard a thing mentioned at dinner without being expected to understand it. "Some kind of protocol for hospitals. He talks about it sometimes." Thomas looked at him. Do you know about that kind of thing?" Declan said. "A little," Thomas said. Declan nodded and didn't follow the thread. He stayed another 20 minutes. When he left, he paused on the porch steps with his hand on the railing. "You didn't ask for anything," he said. At the diner. No, Thomas said. Most people who help me ask for something. Eventually. Thomas looked at him. I didn't know who you were, he said. So I didn't know what I'd be asking for. Declan stood with that for a moment. Then he walked to the waiting car. Thomas watched it pull away and went back inside and stood in the kitchen. He thought about what Declan had said, the protocol, the monitoring system, the offhand mention of his father's company. He thought about the attorney's letter still on his desk, 6 weeks old now, flagging the fact that Ashby Medical's legal team had begun raising questions in the renewal process about what they called ambiguous original inventor documentation. The language was careful and procedural. What it meant, translated plainly, was that Ashby Medical was exploring whether the attribution on patent 92814,422 was as clean as it had always appeared. They were not the first organization in history to look at a profitable patent and quietly inquire whether the documentation might have gaps. Thomas thought about the envelope still sitting on the coffee table. He thought about Lily at the kitchen table, working through her homework with the quiet focus of a person who trusts that the adults around her are managing what needs managing. He went to his desk. He picked up the attorney's letter. He read it again from the first line. Then he picked up the phone. If this story found its way to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Hidden Ledger posts new stories every week, and the one after this one is already waiting. Your support is what keeps the Ledger open. What to 9 o'clock. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, 14th floor of the Ashby Medical Systems building downtown. The agenda, as sent to Thomas's attorney, described it as a quarterly review of licensing terms for the cardiac monitoring protocol. Conrad Ashby arrived at the conference room at 8:52 with 2 attorneys and his VP of Legal Affairs, a methodical woman named Janet Moretti, who had prepared a 40-page briefing document tabbed and color-coded and structured around what she was careful to call documentation clarification. Conrad had read it on the way to the building and asked 2 questions and said nothing else. He did not know the inventor of patent 9,814,422 by sight. He had never needed to. Thomas walked in at 9 o'clock. Conrad looked up from the document in front of him. He went completely still. Thomas sat down across the table and placed a thin folder on the surface between them. Maybe 12 pages. A binder clip. No briefing document. No color-coded tabs. He said nothing. Janet Moretti looked between them. She began, Mr. Hallett, thank you for coming in. As your attorney explained, we've asked you here to discuss the renewal terms for the cardiac monitoring protocol, specifically some questions regarding the original documentation. I know why I'm here, Thomas said. He opened the folder. He slid the top page across the table. Patent Certificate 9,814,422. Assigned to Thomas A. Hallett, M.D. Filed 11 years ago. Valid and uninterrupted since the date of filing. The document was clean, specific, and undeniable in the way that official documents are undeniable when they have been properly maintained. Conrad picked it up. Thomas sat with his hands flat on the table and watched Conrad read it. He watched the exact moment it arrived. It was not a dramatic shift. Conrad's face did not flush or crumble. He went quiet with a very particular quality of quiet. The quiet of a man rearranging a great many things at once, every assumption reorganizing itself around a single new fact. Janet Moretti began to say something about documentation review timelines. Janet, Conrad said. She stopped. Conrad set the certificate down carefully. He looked at it for a moment, then at Thomas. You knew, he said, when I came to your house. Yes, Thomas said. You didn't say anything. You didn't ask, Thomas said. One sentence. The room held it. Janet Moretti and both attorneys were very still in the way of people who have prepared thoroughly for a meeting that is no longer happening. Conrad looked at the certificate, then back at Thomas, with the expression of a man whose certainty has just revealed the full extent of its dimensions to him. The attribution questions, Conrad said slowly. My legal team. Were wrong, Thomas said. The documentation has been complete since filing. The patent has been clean for 11 years. Conrad was quiet. He placed both hands flat on the table and looked at them. I didn't know it was yours, he said. I know you didn't, Thomas said. That was the sentence that did it. The plain acknowledgement, without accusation, because that was what recontextualized everything. Not the certificate, not the royalty numbers, not the 3 months Ashby Medical's legal team had spent questioning a patent that had been inviolable since before they raised the question. What recontextualized everything was that Thomas Hallett had known all of this, had been holding all of it quietly, and had opened his door and let a man with an envelope offer him retraining programs, and circumstances like yours. Conrad looked out the window. The city was visible from the 14th floor, the south end somewhere in the middle distance. Garfield Avenue, in there somewhere beneath the gray morning. He looked back. "What do you want?" he said. Not the testing version. Not the version that was trying to determine what form a thing would take. He said it the way a man says it when the ground has shifted and he's standing on what's left. Thomas picked up his folder. "The renewal," he said. "Full attribution language restored in every licensing agreement across all 61 hospitals. The royalty adjustment my attorney outlined in the letter you received last month." He stood. "That's what I came for." He left the folder on the table and walked out. The attribution dispute was withdrawn within 5 business days. Janet Moretti called Thomas's attorney on a Friday afternoon and confirmed that Ashby Medical would proceed with the renewal under the original terms, with full inventor attribution restored to every licensing agreement in the network. The royalty adjustment, which Thomas's attorney had calculated conservatively and documented in precise detail, was accepted without further negotiation. The 2 attorneys who had drafted the documentation clarification questions were reassigned to unrelated matters. Janet Moretti remained in her role. Neither she nor anyone else spoke of the conference room meeting again. Conrad Ashby did not simply sign the renewal papers and consider the account closed. 3 weeks after the meeting, he called Thomas directly on a number he had obtained without explanation. Thomas answered. "I owe you an apology," Conrad said. "Not the legal version, a real one." Thomas said nothing. "When I came to your house," Conrad said, "I made a set of assumptions about who you were and what your life was. The envelope. I treated you like something to be settled." He paused. "I've been thinking about whether I've done that before. With other people. I think I probably have." Thomas sat with that. "I appreciate you saying so," he said. A silence. Then Conrad said, "Declan told me what you said to him. On the porch." "Which part?" Thomas said. "That you hadn't met him before, so you didn't know what you'd be asking for." He paused again. "He's been different since that night. Asking questions." He looked up cardiac monitoring protocols on his laptop last week. "I don't know what to make of it." "How is he otherwise?" Thomas said. "He's home," Conrad said. "More than he used to be." They talked longer than either of them had planned. At the end, Conrad said, "If there's anything I can do, genuinely, not the envelope version, I'd like the chance to do it right." Thomas thought about the clinic on Clement Street. He thought about the cardiac monitoring equipment. They had been running for 7 years, 2 generations past its last update. He thought about the waiting room that was always full and the supply closet that was never quite adequate. "There might be," he said. 6 months after the conference room meeting, Ashby Medical Systems donated cardiac monitoring equipment to 11 community clinics across the city. No press release. No ribbon cutting. No ceremony. No photographs of anyone presenting an oversized check. The equipment arrived on a Tuesday morning, installed by a service team that worked through the afternoon and left a manual and a card with a service number. Conrad Ashby's personal extension was written on the back of the card in his own handwriting. The clinic on Clement Street was the first to receive equipment. Declan asked his father, the following spring, whether he could volunteer somewhere. Not because Conrad suggested it. He had looked up the clinic himself and texted Thomas on the number Thomas had given him at the all-night diner, which he had kept. He filed patient intake forms. He organized supply closets. He learned to take blood pressure readings under Thomas's supervision. 2 fingers placed just so, learning to be still enough to receive information rather than grab at it. "You're not looking for anything specific," Thomas told him. "You're waiting for what's actually there." Declan concentrated, 2 fingers on a practice cuff, and nodded. Lily watched from the doorway of the supply room with the expression of someone taking very careful notes while pretending not to. The following November, Lily turned 12. Thomas took her to the diner on Mercer. The same one. Red booths, the neon sign blinking in its familiar rhythm, the smell of coffee that had been brewing since before either of them was born. She ordered a hot chocolate without being asked, and she told him about a book she was deep into with the velocity of someone who needs the other person at the table to understand why the book matters. He listened. It was what he did best, and she had always known it. After the check came, she set her mug down and looked at him. "The boy from last year," she said. "The coat." "Declan," Thomas said. "Do you think he knows," she said, "that the night in the rain, that it was actually about something bigger than getting dry?" Thomas looked out the window at the street. The same November rain, roughly, as the year before. The same kind of night. "I think the night in the rain was about a boy who was cold," he said. "That's what it needed to be." Lily turned her mug slowly on the table. "But then everything after happened because I knew what the envelope was," Thomas said. "Not because of the coat." He looked at her. The coat was just a coat. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Then she said, "But the coat is why he came to the door. And the door is why you were in the room." Thomas looked at her. She picked up the mug. "I'm just saying the coat wasn't nothing," she said. He drove home along Clement Street, slower than he needed to. The pharmacy was still lit in its hard rectangle, the same orange lamp over the same wet pavement. He slowed at the curb and looked at the spot where the boy had sat. The curb, the wall, the same unremarkable corner of a parking lot that had no reason to matter, and had mattered enormously. He thought about what Lily had said. The coat wasn't nothing. He thought about the canvas jacket, which was hanging in his closet again next to his medical bag, and, in the flat file in the drawer below, the original copy of Patent 9,814,422, the document he had carried downtown in a thin folder, with a binder clip and set on a conference table, and slid across to a man who had looked at every shelf in his house, and drawn his conclusion, and never thought to ask whose name was on it. The ledger had been open the whole time. Conrad Ashby simply hadn't looked. Thomas pulled back onto the street and drove home. Lily was asleep by the time he came in, deeply and completely, the way her mother had slept, trusting the dark with her whole self. He stood in the doorway for a moment and watched the even rise and fall of her breathing. Then he went to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water. He stood at the counter in the quiet of the house, in the room where the envelope had sat on the coffee table, where a man had looked around and built a picture of someone he hadn't seen. The envelope was long gone. He had given it to the clinic's supply fund the week after Conrad called to apologize. It had covered 2 boxes of examination gloves, a replacement blood pressure cuff, and part of a new thermometer. He rinsed the glass. He turned off the light. The ledger closed without a sound. "Thank you for staying until the balance was restored. The people who watch to the end are the ones who understand why the ledger matters. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now are ready to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the ledger has your name. Hidden Ledger. Every account settles."